Hello, today I am going to discuss on Indian Council Act 1892. Dear friends, the Indian Council Act 1892 was passed by the British Parliament to increase in the size of the legislative councils. This act marks the beginning of representative form of government in India. Now see, what was its background? Its background was that the Indians were gradually becoming aware of their rights with the growth of nationalism. Indian National Congress had adopted some resolutions in its sessions in 1885 and in 1889 and put its demand. The major demands placed were like a simultaneous examination of ICS to be held in England and in India, reforms of the Legislative Council and adoption of the principle of election in place of nomination, opposition to the annexation of Upper Burma, reduction in the military expenditure. The second demand mentioned above reflected the dissatisfaction of the Indians over the existing system of governance. The Indian leaders wanted admission of a considerable number of the elected members. They also wanted a right to discussion on budget matters. Viceroy Lord Dufresne set up a committee. The committee was given the responsibility to draw a plan for the enlargement of the provincial councils and enhancement of their status. The plan was drawn, but when it was referred to the Secretary of State for India, he did not agree to introduction of the principle of direct election. But however, principle of representation by way of indirect election was accepted with some limitations. The most important silent features of this 1892 Council Act was like this. The Act provided for additional members in the central as well as provincial legislative councils. Legislative councils and central legislative councils having various numbers of members, representatives. The central legislative councils was minimum 10 members and maximum 16 members. In legislative council like Bombay, 8 members, Madras, 20 members, Bengal, 20 members, North Western Province having 15 members, Oudh, 15 members. The powers of the legislative council was increased. The members could now discuss the budget without right to vote on it. They were also not allowed to ask supplementary questions. They could ask questions on domestic matters with prior permission of the Governor General. They were also allowed to ask questions on public interest. The Governor General in Council was empowered to make rules for nomination of the members subject to approval of Secretary of State for India. A system of indirect elections was introduced to elect the members of the councils. The universities, district board, municipalities, zamindars and chambers of commerce were empowered to recommend members to provincial councils. Functions of the provincial legislative councils were enlarged, and they were empowered to make laws or repeal the old ones with the prior permission of Governor General. Governor General was empowered to fill the seat in the case of central legislative and by the governor in case of the provincial legislature. Now let us have discussion critically on assessment of the 1892 Council Act. This Act 1892 can be said to be a first step towards the beginning of the representative government in India. However, such representation was via only indirect elections and there was nothing for a common Indian. The system of indirect election prevented direct contact between the public and the representatives. In many ways, this act also served as a reason behind the rise of militant nationalism in coming times. The Congress policy of petition, prayer and protest was seen as a weakness by the British government. This was evident from the following points, as I am going to quote Bal Gangadhar Tilak, as political rights will have to be fought for. The moderates think that this can be won by persuasion. We think that they can only be obtained by strong pressure. Nevertheless, the Act at least provided the Indians an opportunity to share councils at the highest levels and thus laid down the foundations of the representative government. The number of Indians was increased in the legislative councils. The Act was an important milestone that led to the establishment of parliamentary government at a larger stage. This Indian Council Act 1892 was an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom that authorized an increase in the size of the various legislative councils in British India. Indian Council Act 1892 was the beginning of the parliamentary system in India. Thank you for listening to me.